All right, I see people jumping in on the chat saying good morning. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to be here in this moment. I'm going to start by sharing my screen here with our slides. So welcome everyone from Surviving to Thriving, Tools of Hope for Nonprofits in Our Traumatic Political Environment. We are so happy to have you here today. I see more people are joining and joining and joining. I am so excited to have Mauricio Cifuentes with us to really share his expertise. And as we've gotten ready for this webinar, I've learned as much from him as I was able to be putting together into these slides as well. So I'm so excited to have his perspective for all of you. And I will turn it over to Mauricio in a second to share about his background. But today, we are really going to be answering these three questions. How can I best understand this cultural and political moment? How can I reclaim my power in these traumatic times? How can I protect myself and my nonprofit? And so with that, I'm going to ask Mauricio to introduce himself and to get started.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and what a pleasure to be here. And it is wonderful to recognize faces, to see names that I know, and also to see and to get to know new people today. I wish the circumstances were different, but the fact that we are here together gives me so much hope and shows all of us the power we have and the desire we have to do something and to be better and to do better. So thank you. I am, as you can see there, and as Elizabeth said, my name is Mauricio Cifuentes. You can hear my strong Spanish accent. That's because I'm Colombian, used to be a lawyer in a former life, moved to the US like 23, 24 years ago, and became a social worker. I'm a clinical social worker, and currently I am the director of programs for Cicero Family Service. And basically what I do is that I work in the mental health field, and I understand mental health in a very broad way as a social worker. So for me, mental health is very much shaped by the environment, by our circumstances. It is not just about the inner self. And for that reason, this is a perfect topic for a social worker and a perfect topic to partner with a coach of the caliber of Elizabeth, so we can address the way in which we want to respond to the three questions Elizabeth was presenting are very much from two perspectives. One perspective is a trauma-informed lens, and the other perspective is the more practical side about the life of non-for-profits and how they exist in this world. And I'm going to start talking about trauma and about the current situation being understood through the lens of trauma. And I'm going to argue, and I understand many people can disagree with me, but I will argue in this presentation that the policies and procedures related to so many topics like immigration, DEI, retention of funds approved by Congress, Medicaid, and so on, which are being stated and implemented by the current US federal government, are intentionally, and I want to highlight this word, intentionally creating terror among individuals and communities. So, and the reason why I say what I'm saying is because I have heard officials, including the president, using the word terror and synonyms as their goal to be achieved through their own policies and the implementations of those policies. For some, this situation is state terrorism. For some other people, the concept does not exist. For others, the concept of state terrorism exists, but cannot be applied to government as a policy or a behavior against their own citizens. But this, regardless of our understanding, this is a very critical discussion in a democracy, because in a democracy, we, the people, are the nation. And the nation is one of the essential components of the state. We cannot have a state without a nation. And the nation is the people. What happens in a democracy is that each one of us, as part of the nation, surrender some of our individual freedom for the greater good, which is the common good. That is the basis of the social contract that was announced by Rousseau, and it is a core tenet for a democratic state. So I'm not going to dwell into this concept. I just want to poke your brain and your soul and invite you to really think more about this. Is an intentional terror being created by an administration and a valid expression in a democratic state or not? So that is the first fundamental question for us. And all these terror in which we are immersed in, it become a traumatic event or become several traumatic events. But we are like immersed in this traumatic environment. And this traumatic environment is very important for all of us. For clearly, because we are here, it means that it is relevant for us, but also beyond our political affiliation. This is not a partisan issue. We may have strong political affiliations, but this is not a political issue. This is not about our personal social identities. This is not just a Latinx issue or a Black issue or a trans issue. No, it is a human issue. And as human beings, we experience reactions when we are immersed in a terror environment. And we respond to all these in different ways because we are touched by this directly or indirectly. I found last night a very interesting quote or an interaction which happened with the dismissal of Joy Reid from MSNBC. Some of you may know or not that Joy Reid is an African-American journalist who had a show at MSNBC and was dismissed a couple of days ago. And another woman, Nicole Wallace, who's actually a Republican and worked with Republican administrations, was present in the last show of Joy Reid. And she said, I'm going to quote her in her Farewell to Joy. She said, the only thing that chips away at that for me is that despair is the autocrat's tool. It is the most effective weapon. It costs nothing. It is easy to deploy. It is contagious. And then it puts in motion all the actions they want: hopelessness, isolation, exasperation, giving up. And so the only reason I will not wallow in what I feel about you leaving is because I think that's what they want. And this is very much, it is a very wonderful summary in plain language of what I'm going to explain now in a little more jargon-like language from the trauma lens. Well, how is that the trauma dynamics works? So there are like four, and I'm going to talk beyond the DSM-5. So I'm not talking about the technical definition of post-traumatic stress disorder. This is more about how complex trauma operates. And complex trauma occurs when we are exposed to several different traumatic events, or when we are exposed to one traumatic event, but for a long period of time. So it overwhelms our coping mechanisms. And I have heard from many people close to me, and I have experienced that the things I usually do and work for me to overcome my anxiety or my depressive tendencies when something is difficult in my life are not working. It's like it is too much for me. And I wake up and there is some lingering bad taste in my mouth. So we don't really know what to do because our coping mechanisms are overwhelmed. The fight or flight response is not a realistic option. And I'm not saying that some in a cynical way, we wouldn't say, well, sometimes uh, you have the option. I mean, if you are very unhappy here, well, leave. I just remember a couple of days ago, I saw the picture of a young woman from Iran who was deported and went to Panama first on her way back to Iran. And the problem for her is that there is a death sentence for her in her country of origin because she converted to Christianity. So yes, she can go back to the country of origin, but that is not a realistic option. And now I want to talk about the other two because they are related to the most up-to-date definition of trauma. And trauma nowadays is understood as an emotional memory trapped in the body. Trauma is not a cognitive memory. And because it is an emotional memory trapped in the body, we experienced the trauma in our bodies. The body understands that it is feeling a threat, and it is the threat of losing our lives. And for that reason, all the energy of the body is focused on protecting the essential organs in the body. And that's why all the energy is located in the middle part of our bodies. And to be honest, that makes total sense because if we are in a survival mode, it is irrelevant if we think or not. At that time, thinking is irrelevant. What we need is to make sure that we are breathing, that our heart is in full action. So, what we need to do is to realize that the trauma is living in our bodies because we are understanding that we need to survive. We are going to go back to this because based on this is that we will focus on how to help the body to regain a different baseline in which the understanding is that we are not now under a threat to our existence. So this is the way in which we understand trauma dynamics. And trauma has pervasive negative effects, but also, and this is something relatively new that I want to highlight, that it also has positive effects. Relatively current research has been showing how individuals who have been exposed to long-term trauma develop some very unique and positive characteristics. So first, I'm going to talk about those negative effects of trauma exposure because they are going to help us to understand if we are immersed in this terror political environment. So it's not that we are getting cuckoo. It's not that there is something wrong with us. It's that there are normal reaction to those circumstances. And there are three basic things that occur in general. Of course, there are always exceptions. I'm generalizing here, but three very common effects, negative effects of trauma exposure are lack of trust, isolation, and challenges in regulating our emotions. These three things that I'm sure we can recognize in ourselves have some very unique expressions in the case of providers. And I assume that most of us, most of those who are attending this conversation are healers, are providers, are people who are either in the front line serving, for example, immigrants and refugees, or you are people with responsibilities like executive directors, and you are facing this fear of what is going to happen with my funding, but at the same time, you are facing the challenge of being the anchor for your workers. And they look up at you expecting that you are the strong person, and you are shaking inside. So for providers, there are two things that occur frequently. And I know there are more definitions or classifications. I'm going to stick with this a simple one. The one thing is vicarious or secondary trauma, and that is, I'm going to use a simple example. Let's say that your child comes home from school, from kindergarten, and brings some bad cold, and because everyone in the family is living under the same roof, so everyone or other people get sick. So vicarious or secondary trauma means that at some point, many of us start feeling the same symptoms that the clients we have, the people we serve, are experiencing. And the second one, which is very similar but different, is burnout or compassion fatigue. And that is this sense of exhaustion, this inability to experience empathy. And when we start feeling this, we feel guilty because we say, what's going on with me? I used to care so much for the people I love, for the people I serve, and now I'm feeling nothing. And this is a very sophisticated coping mechanism. It might be maladaptive, but it's as if we need to unplug ourselves because otherwise we could not survive. So these are, in a nutshell, the negative effects of trauma. But now I want to talk about the positive effects of trauma. And beware that many times even those positive effects are there because the negatives are so strong and we are more prone to see them than it is difficult to see the positive ones. So one invitation, very strong invitation I want to formulate to all of you today is to start thinking more on those positive effects and think about how to highlight them, how to use them for yourselves and for the people you serve or people you love. The first one is a greater appreciation of life. Is this very profound sense of gratitude? It's like, let's say there is a famine and so many people are dying, and then you realize that you have had some resources available for you. Let's say you have chickens and you were able to eat eggs, and then you realize, oh my gosh, you know, I have had things that allowed me to survive this famine. and you grow this profound sense of gratitude. Also, you or we learn about our personal strength. One of the things, or I remember reading a book about the Holocaust, and it was written by one of the first 299 women who were sent to a concentration camp. It was the first group of women who was sent to be killed. And she was saying, you know, the ones who died first were the wealthy girls in my town. The poor, we had learned how to survive with little. We realized being there how powerful we were. Just think about something more pedestrian, like you start going to the gym and you want to grow your biceps. So you start lifting and doing bicep curls, and then maybe you can barely lift 5 pounds. And after 1 year, one day, you realize that you are able to lift 25 pounds. And that is amazing. So when we have been exposed to trauma, we realize what is our personal strength. One that for me is extremely relevant is the spiritual growth trauma survivors experience. And I'm not talking about religion, but I'm talking about this connection, this sense of transcendency, this sense of purpose and meaning that we develop. Let's think about someone who is a survivor of cancer. The person at some point was diagnosed with cancer, understood that he or she would only have like 6 months of life. And after 5 years, the person is cancer free. And the person wonders, how is that I was able to survive? Why I'm here in this world? How is that I received this second opportunity? Many of us went through this administration in the past. This is the second round, and we survived the first one. And of course, it is different. Many would say worse, but we survived once. The other thing, and this is about a paradox, a paradox coming from trauma, is that even though we want to isolate, we don't want at some level to connect, on the other hand, we learn to value tremendously relationships and connections. And I know that that is true for all of us, even if we don't articulate that to ourselves. But the fact that we are here is the proof of this. And finally, and for me, the most important of all the positive effects of trauma exposure is that we are forced to open ourselves to new possibilities. We must be creative, and that is in us. So the more we are hit by the traumatic event, the more we develop the capacity to be creative. So when we look at the negative and the positive effects of trauma, we can clearly see two challenges: is to integrate of this and to solve the relationship paradox, wanting to be isolated and badly wanting to be connected. To move in that direction, to get all that, what we need is for our body to understand, to believe, to act under the assumption that we are not under a threat to our own lives. And for that, the quintessential element is to achieve a new emotional baseline through our bodies. Before we do that, we cannot even access in full our cognitive abilities. And Elizabeth is going to guide us through how to achieve this.
All right. Thank you so much, Maurizio, for sharing all of that. I will tell you, this webinar was not originally designed to be this way. It was at first really designed to provide practical tools of how to protect our nonprofits. But when we started reaching out to other people who could help with the webinar, or people who might want to hear what we had to say, people were saying to us that they were so overwhelmed, that they were upset, that they were having trouble sleeping, that we realized that the first thing we needed to do was to get people thinking in this way and grounding in their body, and then moving into the practical tools, because we realized that people were emotionally overwhelmed and unable to respond to the moment. Um, I was very lucky that over the last year, I had been introduced to a type of work called positive intelligence through a client of mine, which was introduced to her through another coach. And in it, it's a mental fitness program that uses daily practice, a weekly focus, measurable progress, and community support. We're actually going to do an exercise together right now to kind of wash away some of the trauma, some of those negative or nervous types of feelings we're feeling right now in our body as we talk about these things. Or if you're like me and you had an extra cup of coffee, um, we want to kind of clear that out and then talk about the practical skills. So, if you haven't already, feel absolutely fine taking down your video and kind of going where people can't see you, because we're gonna run this exercise right now. So I'm gonna ask you right now, I'm gonna invite you to close your eyes, and we're gonna take 2 deep breaths. Now allow your breath to return to its normal rhythm. With your eyes closed, or if you're in an environment where you must keep your eyes open, gently rub 2 fingers together with such attention to detail that you can feel every ridge of both fingers, those fingerprints. And allow your finger to move and explore other textures on the other finger, being present to those sensations. Take your 2 hands together if you can, and rub the fingertips down the finger and palm of the other hand and back up again. And do that on the other side. Listen for the farthest away sound in your environment. Now hear the closest sound. If you haven't heard your own breathing, listen to your breathing now. As we resettle and ground in our bodies, I want you to move your shoulders, scan your body for tension, and gently move any place you find tension to release it from your body. When you're able, I invite you to gently open your eyes. Um, Feel free to put in the chat how that was for you. What I like about the PQ Positive Intelligence program is rather than mindfulness just being something that happens early in the day and then you go into your whole day where you're attacked by emails and phone calls and potential funding cuts, that actually you can take them in 10-second increments throughout your day and to get centered. If you're sitting across the table from a donor and you're nervous about asking for money, you can do the fingertip exercise. You can stare deeply into their eyes and really listen to their voice, really look at their iris, become present in your body and in the physical sensations so that you're not in your head, you're not thinking about all those things. For some of you, that may have felt very weird and not what you wanted to do in a webinar. But I don't know if you can tell my voice. One, I am sick, but when I do this and when I guide clients through this, my voice actually deepens because I'm actually getting a little bit more grounded and I'm less high and tight in my neck and shoulders. If you we're going to be sending out lots of resources after this webinar, but one of those is to be able to take a saboteur assessment, and you can find out what particular fear um, mechanisms you're using to respond to the problems that are happening. And if you want, you can have a free coaching session with me where we'll go over your saboteurs and kind of look at what's happening there. So feel free when after this to go take a saboteur assessment. We're going to do a very quick summary on what to do next with Maurizio, and we'll go into advocacy and fundraising.
Thank you. And yes, it has to be quick, and you have all the information in the slide. But basically, I want to highlight that this may happen once the body is not feeling the threat of dying. So again, the body working on getting that baseline is so extremely critical. So once we recover, let's say in full, our intellectual capacity, then evaluate, set realistic expectations, and act. That is so critical. We cannot save the world. We cannot do everything for everyone, but we can do some things which are realistic based on the evaluation of the situation. But do not remain in the pre-contemplation or contemplation stage of change. Move forward and do something. And one of the main things we can do is to connect with others. But connecting with others doesn't mean going to parties if that is what you don't want to do. Be realistic again. One thing which is very, very critical is offering the loving presence within your abilities. This Monday, I'm going to the border with a group of students, law school students from Loyola. They are going to be exposed to very difficult situations visiting some of the shelters of the people at the border. And they are going to interact with these individuals for some few minutes. They are going to hear horrible stories, and they will not have a magic stick to solve all of their problems. But they can offer their loving presence. How many times we are on the phone with a good friend and we talk for 1 hour, and at the end, we feel much better, and our partner, spouse, ask, okay, so did you solve the problem? No. What did you learn? Oh, not really much. I'm still struggling. But you feel so much better. And in terms of connecting with others, asking for help is one of those things. And many times when people expect from us to be the support of them, we forget that we also need that support. Don't forget the example of the oxygen mask on the airplane. If you are with a child, you have to put the mask on you first. The next one is identify specific and effective self-care interventions. I'm not going to dwell on that. Every person knows what are the things that may work for them and may not work for them. So choose wisely. Now, the next one is extremely important because we are healers. I think that all or most of us in this conversation are healers. We care about other people. And it is very easy to forget that we must set boundaries and limits without feeling guilt. If we are still feeling guilt, maybe it is the time to ask for professional help and go to therapy. Be creative. If you feel, many years ago, I was in therapy, and I remember my clinician saying to me, so Mauricio, what you are saying to me is that you are trapped in a house with no doors and no windows. I said, you are right. That's exactly what I'm saying. And she said, well, I have to tell you, then one of the walls is fake. So be creative and find a wall. If you didn't find a door or a window, there is a false wall. And finally, taking care of ourselves is not a one-time event. We have to establish a continuity of care plan. And if this is associated with the political environment, maybe we are going to deal with this for the next 4 years. Elizabeth, we are all yours.
All right. We have a lot to cover. I do want to just kind of close this section about taking care of the individual with how can we do this at our own organizations. This might be a time you can be looking to have support systems within your nonprofit or your organization. Can there be peer check-ins? Will you use a meeting to have a time for people to kind of talk about how they're feeling around some of these things to start off? And really modeling vulnerability. This might also be a good time to look at organizational policies prioritizing mental health. Maybe they're not something that you can change in this fiscal year or this calendar year, but maybe it's something that can actually start in the next fiscal year or calendar year. But go ahead and take a look. See, are there some things? Do you want to have mental health days? Do you want to have some things that make it easier for people to handle this? And we talked about the power of community and connection several times here. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, so I'm not going to get into it here. Let's dive into advocacy. I think it is important that we, in this moment, understand our power and understand the tactics of power that are being used. I watched a webinar from Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez about what's happening and how you can take action because I was trying to make sure that I understood the moment, and I definitely learned a lot of things here. I want to emphasize again that I'm not here to speak politically, but more to say that from a democratic perspective, from the idea of democracy, all of us can protect democracy, and it doesn't matter what our political beliefs are, that democracy is under threat, and also our nonprofits are under threat from our missions to our funding. And so just, taking it from that perspective. One of the ideas really here, and I think Mauricio really gets to this early on in his section, is this is intentional. If we're flooding the zone and we're putting so much information out there from the government, it overwhelms the public with crises and it induces passivity amongst the people. And so, if you are feeling that, if you are feeling physically overwhelmed, if you are upset, if you are worried, that is intentional. So, we don't have to think there's anything wrong with us. That is how it is designed to make us feel, and then we have to figure out how are we going to respond to it. um I really feel it as this moment of disruption, right? And everything is just executive order, executive order, executive order. And we have questions. Am I going to lose my funding for my nonprofit? Am I going to have a job? Are we losing our rights? Oh my gosh, there's raids. Will my partner be deported? Will my clients be okay? It's just fear all over the place. Um, but when you can pull that aside and look at the pattern underneath it, it's not as surprising. There's really two places that moves are happening right now. One is around people and one is around money. Um, if they renew the tax cuts that happened in the first Trump administration, those equal $4 billion. In order to get that money, they have to cut other things because they can't pass it through Congress. They'll have to do it through reconciliation, and that means that the budget needs to balance. So that money has to come from somewhere, and so they're looking to get it from things like USAID, Medicaid, Medicare funding in those programs. So instead of it feeling like, oh my gosh, they're attacking environment, they're attacking education, they're attacking this, they're attacking that, we can start to see it as they're trying to cut $4 billion to give to wealthier individuals. The other places that they're cutting is people, and that's really disrupting government regulators, which allows them to, say, get out of fines or to not have as much oversight. So once we can see this is what's happening, hopefully it feels less surprising. If this is something that just you already knew and it's not a big deal, I will say because there's so much information and everything changing day by day, hour by hour, sometimes we're preparing and then there's the next component and the next thing it changes and the next thing it changes. But I hope seeing this as a pattern makes it where we can be less reactive and be less surprised so that we're more in a state of action. So how do we respond? Just a few things here. Pick your issue. Take one step, then take another step. We have to break these down to the smallest components. When you're overwhelmed, um, I'm not personally going to save education and save the environment and save this and save that. I can pick something that's important to me and I can do one thing. And if that one thing is to call a legislator, that's the one thing I can do. Then I can say, okay, what's the next thing I can do? I can host a webinar. What's the next thing I can do? So taking it step by step, one by one. And I really want you to listen to your own energy and listen to your instincts. If your nonprofit is focused on environment, but you say have a child with a disability and disability is where your heart is going, you can spend your day working on one and then you can go take a couple actions on the one that's heaviest on your heart. So I want us to really be flexible. I find sometimes when emotions get stuck in our body is when we prevent ourselves from action. So I'm going to say find an action and really, just in this idea, there are more of us than there are of them. So if each of us are taking an action on the issue that's most important to us, yes, again, personally, one person is not going to solve all these problems, but between all of us, we can take action and we can slow them down. Um, you will be getting an email with all these organizations, but I would say follow advocacy organizations. I worked at an advocacy organization, and I will say 24 hours a day, they are focused on the political implications and the policies that go with certain issues, and they understand it better. Um, we have hours and hours of work that could go into this webinar. I definitely would like to do another one just on advocacy and what can you as a nonprofit do versus not do as a 501(c)(3). But right now I would say join these other advocacy organizations, lend your voice, and let them be part of helping to protect these areas. Share the know your rights information that we're going to send out. And let's not become compliant ahead of time. As Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, make them make you. Make them make you. Let's make it hard. Um, the more that we are in action around the issues that we are trying to protect, the more it slows things down. They're going to break things, but small acts of resistance create friction. And so basically, they can break less things if we slow them down. So sometimes when we get in that state of despair, we're like, oh my gosh, they're going to cut this, they're going to cut that. We just have to understand that we are slowing them down. When I worked at the advocacy organization, one of the things I really learned is when you have an administration that's favorable to your policies, that's when you're pushing for more. But when you have an unfavorable administration, what you're doing is protecting. And you have to understand that protecting is the victory. This is not what we're going to get more W's on the board. We are just going to be protecting. And I think if you think of it that way, slow them down, protect your missions, protect your issues. Hopefully, that is a framework that's helpful. And I want to say support other nonprofits. This is a time to introduce each other to funders, to other people, support other nonprofits. This is not the time for the nonprofit Hunger Games. We really need to be making sure we're helping each other as a sector. Okay. I breezed through that very quickly just to make sure that we have time for everything. I want to talk about the fundraising implications of this time. And there's really 3 frameworks we can use for this, which is short term, medium term, and long term. So let's start with short term. Research really shows that whenever there are policy changes, the side that loses in those policy changes tends to attract a lot more donations. So if you're serving a group that you feel like is under threat right now, this is a great time to be leaning into that and what they call rage donations. Um, and attracting more donations for your issue. So every disadvantage is also an advantage. So if you've got a disadvantage, use it as an advantage. Get out in front of donors and start raising money. We take those small donations, get whatever you can. This is a time to be communicating. Time your appeals with major news events. I would say this is a time for imperfect action rather than perfect inaction. We all want to write and rewrite our appeals over and over and over again, but I will tell you, in my 20 plus years of fundraising, sometimes the best appeals have been the ones that we sent out that day because something happened in the news and it affects the people that we serve or it affects our mission or our nonprofit. So just get information out there. Talking about communication, um, Barry Benson of Greater Reach Consulting, who really put a lot of this together with us, he attended a webinar in supporting this where it was stated that only 5% of Americans think that nonprofits have positively impacted their lives. I think we all know that that number is much, much higher, but it really shows that the erosion of trust that's happening in our environment has begun to include nonprofits. And I think the research has shown that for the last several years. We need to make sure that people know what we do and how we're helping, not just the people that we're always helping, but other people as well. A lot of times we have a much larger impact than what we're talking about. And I very much want to emphasize reaching out to donors. This is where we can be protecting ourselves. And this is actually where we can be growing and flourishing. If you remember, the title of this webinar is From Surviving to Thriving. Pick up the phone. Call your board members, speak to them, each one of them, and let them know how this current moment is affecting your nonprofit. Maybe your funding is fine right now. Let them know it's fine right now. These are the things that I'm worried about. This is, if this happens, this is how it would impact us. Let them know that. And after you've done that with the board members, start doing that with your major donors and then do it to the next group. Really make sure that the people around you know that, your local business leaders, your town mayor, whomever. Make sure you're having these conversations because when it is time, when something has happened, it may be too late. Have the conversations now. And I will say a lot of the coaching I do with nonprofits is really getting them to be in deeper relationship with their major donors, making sure they're having conversations or making sure they're having the relationships that lead to major donations. When I have nonprofits do this, that works really well. When, for whatever reasons, the emotions that get in our way, right? When we're afraid to pick up the phone, you know who you are. I know when I'm like that too. When that happens, and then the nonprofit goes through something, those nonprofits don't weather the storm as well as the ones who are in relationship with the people around them. So I was gonna say, don't be afraid and do it anyway. Do your breathing exercises, do your PQ on their irises, on their voice when you're talking to them, whatever it takes, be in communication. So I will tell you, I did not actually even want to put medium and longer term stuff in here. And it was because I really was thinking more from a survival moment. But if we are talking about grounding in our bodies and understanding that this is more of a marathon than a sprint, we do need to be thinking about the short term and the longer term. So as we look at the medium term here, the tax policies, as they continue, they made the standard deduction higher, and that means that only the highest net worth people are the ones who are actually filling out something to deduct the amount of donations that they made. And so focusing on high net worth individuals still makes sense. As we talked about with the rage donations, just getting those appeals out there and getting all the small donations too are great. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying understand that it's only the highest, wealthiest people that are able to write off their donations. And so they are a good place to focus if you have those types of relationships. donor advised funds have been growing and growing over the last several years. And so this is something where focusing on these people, we don't always know who they are. And so when we're having those conversations and those relationships with the people in our database, um, we are then um, having an opportunity for people with donor advised funds or with stocks to make those gifts. They are flexible. They've already been given. They have to be given to a nonprofit. So it doesn't take anything away from the person. They've already gotten the tax advantages from it. Um, and then I would say diversify, pick one additional funding area. If you're great at, say, government grants, can you focus more on foundation grants? Have those conversations with your foundation grantors. Um, Corporate sponsorships and workforce development is really talking about how there are programs that are attractive to people with these political beliefs. And so you make a look at your programming and say, yes, a lot of my programming is not attractive to this administration, but maybe some of it is, like workforce development. Look for those things that are fundable by people on all sides of the political spectrum. When we were talking about foundation and corporate, I want to just get to this next slide about finding your allies. So you may not realize this, but a lot of foundation people are people that worked at nonprofits. Um, they are the ones who have pushed the nonprofit sector to diversify their board and to make sure that we have people who represent the communities we serve on our board. Um, they are good people to talk to. So you can talk to them and have real conversations about how you are worried about this moment might affect you. So while you're thinking about the people to call, let grant program officers be some of those people. If you're lucky enough to already have grant funding, let those people be part of your network that you reach out to and have a conversation and ask them to introduce you to other funders. Um, if you don't have that, one of the best ways you can get foundation grant funding is to begin to develop a relationship with that program officer before it's time to apply. Obviously, make sure you read the guidelines very well and to make sure that you're a good fit before you call them. But once you've done that, it is okay to have a conversation with them like a person. They are people and they can be some of our best allies right now. So please don't count them out. And then finally, just looking at the long-term fundraising. Because of the way that they are restructuring estate tax, there may be fewer estate gifts as in planned gifts. So this is why, again, it's really important to have these conversations with your donors and to develop deep relationships. Unmarried women still are some of the best plan giving prospects because they care about people, they want to make a difference, and they may not have family that they are going to pass on their estate to. And even if it's a modest estate of, a middle class home, that's a lot of money for a nonprofit, right? That happened for a nonprofit I was working with just last year with somebody who is not wealthy, but if it's everything you own, it's actually quite a bit of money for a nonprofit, right? So continue to have those conversations with the people around you. Because of baby boomers, there is an expectation of a large transfer of wealth. It's a conversation I find very upsetting because I have a lot of great baby boomers in my life, but it's something we should be aware of as nonprofits. And that as interest rates and assets are changing, um, they can make a really big difference in what people want to give if they're trying to get rid of stock, if it's appreciating, that it might be advantageous for them to do that. So when we're thinking about going to donors, understand that sometimes it's to their advantage to be giving things to us, like from a donor advised fund or a stock gift or an appreciated asset. They don't want to pay taxes on that. So just understand if we're only focused on cash, we are missing out. And again, that's when we can kind of lift our head up and think and not be in crisis mode. But I do want to just put it out there to think on these three time frames. Protect for long-term progress and to share. With that, I really just mean if you find good funders, share it with other nonprofits. I had this moment where I was lucky enough that a mentor of mine, who taught me so much when I was coming up, she had, we were applying for a very big grant, and then she called up someone she knew and said, Hi, you should apply for this grant. It's going to be really great for your organization. I was like, "Ah, we're going for that grant. Why would you tell her?" And she's like, that is a scarcity mindset. She said, a rising tide lifts all boats. She said, there is enough for all of us. And we really want to make sure that everybody has a chance to get funding. And I really remember that moment. And I've been lucky in many ways to have been coach for her when I was coming up. I'm going to take a moment to put a poll up here. Maurizio and I have tons and tons more content that we want to show all of you and keep providing it. So we're actually going to put a poll up. We want to know, how would you like to continue to be supported by us? What would you pay for that type of support? And then we have some ideas. And we would just like to get a sense from you, what is valuable. So I'm going to put a poll up here. Great. And if you could just take a minute to really answer some of these questions. Are you guys seeing the poll? Okay, good. Okay, Lanisha doesn't see it. Um, let's see. So I will say we can also send something out afterwards if you're having trouble seeing the poll, but I do see people are starting to fill this out. Great. Good answers coming in here. All right. While you're answering that, I want to leave us on uh one last quote um to hopefully give us the best possible ending. I really learned about the Black Joy movement from a client of mine, and um, as someone in nonprofit, I was like, aren't we supposed to be stressed out and working hard all the time and feel like everything is a tragedy? And I really learned from Virginia Community Voice about how joy is something that we can reclaim, and that it is an act of resilience and an act of resistance. And I loved this quote: Black joy affirms that I am not a victim. I am an agent of change. It rejects the idea that violence, injustice, discrimination, prejudice, and dominance over others are normal and acceptable actions. And I would say we can all take a page out of this book and realize that we can reclaim joy in our lives while we take action to protect the nonprofits and the people that we serve. So thank you, everyone, for being here today. It was a real pleasure to share this with you.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day and the weekend.
Thank you.